All right, so welcome everyone. So happy to see new faces and familiar faces. We're so happy to be learning with you again during this first week of Drisha Folzman. This class is the Poetics of Mishnah and Methodological approach. The class is taught by Rabbi Dr. Avi Walfish and Rabbanit Dr. Adina Sternberg. So just a little, just so these newcomers that just came in, when I promote you to a panelist, it just kind of gives you a chance to be able to unmute if you want to ask questions or make comments whenever the time allows. Also, you're welcome to turn on your video so we can kind of feel like we are together in a class and can see your smiling faces. Just wanted to ask everyone to stay muted whenever you're not speaking, whenever you're not participating. You're welcome to unmute when it's the right time to ask a question or comment. You're also welcome to write questions and comments in the chat box here on Zoom or as a comment on Facebook if you're watching us live. Welcome as well. An introduction to this class. Mishnah is a notoriously difficult work to study as a coherent text. In this course, we will explore the nature and purpose of Mishnah redaction. Employing close reading techniques, we will see how the Mishnah redactor employs keywords and literary structures in order to weave together units and themes. Again, this class is co-taught by Rabbi Dr. Avraham Walfish and Rabbanit Dr. Adina Sternberg. So I'll do a quick introduction of them both. Rabbi Dr. Avraham Walfish is renowned in the world of Jewish studies for his innovative studies of Mishnah and other classic rabbinic texts. He has taught in many institutions of Torah and academic learning, including Pardes Institute, Drisha, and Bar-Ilan University. In 2005, Rabbi Walfish was awarded the Israeli Education Ministry Prize for creative work in Jewish culture. Rabbanit Dr. Adina Sternberg holds a BA in Bible from Hebrew University and an MA and PhD in Talmud from Bar-Ilan University. She has studied at Lindenbaum, Migdal Oz, Matan, and other organizations. Rabbanit Sternberg has taught at a variety of institutions and is currently at Matan. And with this, I'll turn this to you, Rabbi Walfish.
Okay, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to teach Mishnah, and always a pleasure to teach for Drisha, whom I have a long-standing relationship, not only through family. Today's class is going to be somewhat challenging. The way I usually like to teach and the way most of this course will be structured is by focusing on a particular text and trying to understand that text. Since this is the first class of the series, and we are talking about a methodology class, so I think introduction is in order, and to have an introduction to Mishnah, we're going to have to jump around somewhat. So I'm going to try to focus it on particular sources, particular texts, but during the course of the shiur, we are going to be looking at quite a broad variety of texts. That's not the norm. That's not how we're normally going to operate in this series, but I think it has to be done today. So I hope you'll all be able to follow. Also, since we're having such a broad variety of texts, I wasn't able to get you translations of all of them. Usually, at least my classes, I don't know about Adina, but at least in my classes, I will generally try to provide translations of the main texts that we'll be looking at. Okay, so having said that, and before we ask the questions that we're going to try to address in this series of shiurim, let's start off by looking at a text. I have this text here on my screen. I think this is it. Let's take a look. Yeah, here we go. What and why is Mishnah? So The first thing we're going to do is see why that's a challenging question. And in order to see why that's a challenging question, let's start right from the very beginning. Okay, the very first units of Mishnah in Tractate Brachot. Okay, and we'll look and see how the Mishnah starts to present its material and start to understand why, as you had in the introduction, why Mishnah is a notoriously difficult work to analyze as a text. Okay, let me maybe say a word about text. Okay, people don't often reflect on the etymology of the word text, but text actually comes from the same root as the word textile or texture. Okay, what text really is something woven together. Okay, you take strands and you weave them together. That produces a text. It's interesting that you have something similar in the Hebrew. Mishnah is divided into masechtot, tractates. Now, masechet literally also means weaving. Okay, so the word text and the word masechet, both of them indicate that we're looking at something woven. Okay, and Mishnah is it's challenging enough to look at when you look at the individual units. It's even more challenging when you try to look at it as a text. We'll see why that is in just a moment. This is something that I like to say, that it's important when you're learning Mishnah not to do what it's often called, I'm learning Mishnayos. We're learning Mishnayot. Mishnayot means individual discrete units. That's not a text. Okay, to make it into a text, you have to see how these units are woven together. Then it makes it into a text, and that transforms it from Mishnayot to Mishnah. Okay, so let's start to see why this is challenging. Okay, the very first Mishnah in the 6 Sdarim of Mishnah. Okay, you have the Hebrew in front of you. I won't bother reading the Hebrew. I'll just go directly to the translation for, assuming some of you need that, and those who know the Hebrew can follow it along in the Hebrew. Okay, from when do we read Shema in the evening? From the time that Kohanim enter to eat their truma until the end of the first watch. The words of Rabbi Eliezer. Chachamim say until midnight. Rabban Gamliel says until the dawn begins to break. Ya'aleh Amud Hashach. Okay, now this unit right away, the first Mishnah continues, but this unit right away presents us with some of the issues. Okay, I think anybody today writing a text where you'd be presenting the laws of Kriyat Shema would start off with, well, what would you start off with? I think you're speaking. You're muted.
When to say the Shema?
Okay, well, that's what the Mishnah actually started with. But I imagine that a modern redactor would start off with something else.
Yeah, Ilana is saying the Torah source of the mitzvah.
Right.
Oh.
Okay, you would start off with what is Kriyat Shema. Okay, you'd start off with the Torah source from which we learned Kriyat Shema. Okay, by the way, if you ever want answers to these questions, I think it's always important to ask these questions. Okay, how is the Mishnah diverging from what we would normally think to do? A good way of answering that question, in many cases, is to open up the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. The Rambam named his Mishneh Torah after Mishnah. That's why it's called Mishneh Torah. And he makes that very clear in his introduction to the Mishneh Torah. Okay, but one thing he did not do is preserve the order of the Mishnah. he divides up the topics differently, and he organizes them differently. And almost invariably, the Rambam will open with, what exactly is this mitzvah? Where is it derived from in the Torah? That's what he does with Kriyat Shema, and that's what he does almost invariably. That's his normal way of opening, and that makes perfect sense to us. To start off with, from when do you read Shema in the evening? What is Shema? Why am I reading it in the evening? When else am I supposed to read? Is there another time I'm supposed to read it? We don't know any of those things. So the Mishnah is starting, what we call in literature, in medias res. Starts off in the middle. Okay, it doesn't start off at the beginning. As we'll see, that becomes almost like a norm in Mishnah. The Mishnah rarely will start a topic from the beginning. The Mishnah does start a topic from the beginning, makes you sort of scratch your head and say, what happened? Why did that happen? Okay, but here it's pretty usual. That doesn't make it more understandable. Okay, I think one of the reasons people don't ask these questions about Mishnah is they're so used to seeing Mishnah not present things the way they expect that they no longer expect it. So they don't even ask the question. Okay, but I think even if the norm in the Mishnah is not to present it the way you expect, you still need to ask the question. So how does the Mishnah like to present things? And why? Why doesn't the Mishnah present things the way we would normally regard being logical? That's question number one. Okay, now, by the way, the Talmud, the very first sugya in the Talmud immediately picks up on this question. It says, Me'ematai, what kind of way is that to start a tractate? From when? From when do you do X? Well, what is X? First explain to me what X is, and then ask me when. Okay, the Talmud immediately asks that question and gives a very interesting answer, but that's not our subject. Okay, and now look at the Mishnah's answer. From the time the Kohanim enter to eat their truma until the end of the first watch. Does anybody know what these times are? Well, that's something pretty challenging. You need a lot of information to know when Kohanim are entering to eat their truma. Well, what is that all about? Okay, it ends up working out that it's effectively the same time as we identify as Tzeta Kochavim, okay, which is nightfall. Tzeta Kochavim throughout the halacha is the time of nightfall, but that just begs the question. So why doesn't the Mishnah just say Tzeta Kochavim? Why does the Mishnah instead identify this time with this very unusual way of identifying it? The time the Kohanim go in to eat their truma. To know what that is, you have to know the laws of purity and impurity. You have to know how the laws of impurity impact on the eating of truma. When you put all this background information together, then you can piece together that the time that the Mishnah is indicating is Tzeta Kochavim. But why? Why present it in that fashion and not what would seem to be the much more straightforward way of saying Tzeta Kochavim? We all know, how to measure that. Okay, the way the Talmud describes it is 3 medium-sized stars are visible in the heavens. That's called Tzeta Kochavim. Okay, and today we of course don't bother looking in the heavens, and for those of you who are living in cities, there's too much light pollution anyway. You won't see the stars at the right time. Okay, so instead you look at your calendar and they've calculated it precisely, okay, to tell you what it is. But that would be the logical way of presenting it. And similarly, that's the beginning time for Kriyat Shema. Then the end time for Kriyat Shema at Sof Hashmona Rishona, the end of the first watch. First watch where, who, when, why? Again, not really clear. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Okay. Then we have something else which some scholars find challenging. We have conflicting opinions. So that immediately raises for scholars the question of, well, is the Mishnah designed to be a halachic codex? If it's a halachic codex, why is it bringing conflicting opinions? Okay, now, there are many reasons to assume that the Mishnah is not a halachic codex, even though on its surface it might appear to be one. But that's one of the issues that's been heatedly debated among Mishnah scholars, particularly in the latter part of the 20th century. Two leading Mishnah scholars who had a long-standing rivalry, Hanoch Albeck and Yaakov Nachum Epstein, had a very serious difference of opinion to whether Mishnah is designed to be a halachic codex or not. Okay, so it's hard to read Mishnah as a halachic codex, and not only for the reason I mentioned, for other reasons as well. But if it's not a halachic codex, so then what is it? And what does govern how the Mishnah is put together? Okay, so that's, again, a question that scholars have debated, and that's going to be the core question of this course. Okay, let's move on to Mishnah Bet. Okay, now the second part. What about morning Shema? When is the time for that? Again, a very unusual way of identifying the time. Mishiakir ben Tchelet Levan. From the time when there's enough light so you can differentiate between, okay, Tchelet is probably sky blue, okay, and white. There's got to be enough light so you can make out vaguely that these are two different colors. And that's the time for reciting Kriyat Shema. Outside the question of why is that the time of all times for reciting Kriyat Shema? Okay, but again, why identify the time in that very unusual way? The next Mishnah, Beit Shammai Omrim Ba'erev Kol Adam Yatu Yikru'u V'Boker Yamdu. Well, we've just jumped from one topic to another. Now we're no longer talking about when to read Shema, but the person's posture when he's reading Shema. Again, is hardly the first topic you would think we would want to address. We would think, before talking about how to position your body when you read Shema, you would think, well, maybe we'd want to talk about, what am I reading? Okay, which parts of the Torah? How am I reading it? All kinds of other questions we would think would come up first. Instead, do you have to be standing? Do you have to be lying down? Beit Shammai thinks you have to be either lying down or standing, depending on the time of day. Beit Hillel says, no, every person reads in his own way, as it says, Uvlechtecha v'derech. Okay? So Beit Shammai has a proof text, B'shoch b'cha uvkumecha. Beit Hillel has a proof text, B'lechtecha v'derech. Okay, now, again, something is very challenging here because we've shifted topics, and not only is it unclear why is this topic coming up so early on, it's also unclear, does this topic have anything to do with the previous topic? Previous topic was, let's define precisely what time frame we're talking about. Now we're talking about what posture. Doesn't seem to be very much of a connection between these two. Also, interestingly, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel sort of signal us indirectly what the biblical source for Kriyat Shema is, B'shoch b'cha uvkumecha. Okay, this, again, seems to be a very unusual way of presenting it. Sort of incidentally as a way of establishing how you're supposed to position your body. So the Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai relate to the core pasuk, B'shoch b'cha uvkumecha. Why didn't that pasuk come up earlier? Why wasn't it presented as the core pasuk for Kriyat Shema? Okay, Mishnah Daled. In the morning, you recite 2 brachot. In the evening, and 1 after. So 2 before Kriyat Shema, 1 after. In the evening, you recite 2 before and 2 after. Well, we've jumped around to a third topic now. Now we're not talking, and again, a topic that wouldn't seem to be the core issue of Kriyat Shema. We're talking now not about Kriyat Shema per se, but about the surrounding prayers. How did we get there? Okay, and 5, Maskirin Yitziat Mitzrayim Balelot. Does that have something to do with Kriyat Shema? Okay, in the evening, you're supposed to mention Yitziat Mitzrayim or commemorate the Exodus from Egypt. And then there's a debate about it. We all know this Mishnah well because it appears in the Haggadah. Okay, this whole Mishnah is quoted in the Haggadah. Okay, so we all know about Ben Zomah's drasha. Okay, Harei ani kiven shivim shana, and Ben Zomah's drasha and the Chachamim's response. But again, what's it doing here? Why here? Okay, so the Mishnah seems to be a kind of hodgepodge, jumping from one topic to the other without any clear direction. That makes it very difficult to construe as a text. Okay, if we just look briefly at chapter 2 starts off with, if you were reading the Torah, okay, and you have to add in a detail that's not explicit in the Mishnah, but while reading the Torah, you happened to be reading the appropriate passages from Dvarim and Bamidbar, okay, that correspond to the Parshiot of Shema, and while you're reading them, okay, boom, the sun went down, okay, stars came out, and I happened to be reading the right passages. Well, if you direct your heart, then you will have fulfilled the mitzvah. So it's not enough just to read. You have to accompany the reading with some kind of mental component. Okay, that actually makes sense. But why isn't that much earlier on in the tractate? Now we're talking about the real nitty-gritty, how to read it. Okay, how to read it, and we start with the mental component. Then we continue with Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha explaining the order of the passages. Oh, finally we know what the passages of Shema are. Okay, finally, when we got to chapter 2, the second Mishnah, somebody deigned to tell us what passages we're supposed to be reading. And not only that, he also told us the order. And not only the order, he also told us what the governing ideas are, right? Shema comes before Vayam Shemoah, so that you will receive upon yourself the kingdom of heaven first, and only then receive upon yourself the yoke of mitzvot. Okay, so now we finally found out what Kriyat Shema is all about. We had to go through one chapter plus before somebody bothered telling us what is it that we're talking about all of this time. Okay, so this is challenging to say the least. That if you want to view the Mishnah as a text, so it seems difficult to do that. Okay, so some might say, and in fact many have said, well, maybe it isn't really a text. Maybe it really is a hodgepodge. But then you have to ask yourself the question, why did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi put together a hodgepodge? Okay, what was he after? What was he trying to accomplish? Okay, was it just a halachic compendium? Even if it's a halachic compendium, I'd expect it to be put together somehow more logically. If it's not that, so then what is it? Okay, so these are the issues. Okay, so just I brought another couple of examples we'll look at very briefly just to get a sense of how this is not so unique to the Mishnah. Okay, so I'll take two of my favorite examples how the Mishnah is not arranged the way we would expect. One of them is Masechet Gitin. The first Mishnah of Masechet Gitin starts like this. Someone who brings a get from abroad, from overseas, has to say, the shaliach, okay, the messenger who's delivering the get, has to declare as he delivers it, this get was written in my presence and signed in my presence. Now, all of this before we know what a get is. We don't know what a get is. What are we talking about? Well, this Mishnah seems to presuppose we know an awful lot about a get. What is the Mishnah presupposing we know about a get? It's presupposing we know that a get has laws as to how it has to be written. Bifanai nichtav, that's why I have to say bifanai nichtav. way of saying, I know it was written legitimately, it was written properly. So there are laws about how a get is supposed to be written. And b'fanai nechtam, a get has to be signed. Well, there are laws about how a get has to, A, that a get has to be signed, B, how a get has to be signed. Okay, and C, the Mishnah is also presupposing that a get doesn't have to be given directly from the husband to the wife, the way it sounds in the Torah. The Torah says, "V'natan biyada." He writes her a bill of kritut, of divorce, and puts it in her hand. Well, here he's not putting it in her hand. He's sending a shaliach. So this Mishnah is presupposing three pieces of knowledge that we don't have, and then saying, given all of that, now let's add a ruling. When the shaliach delivers the get from abroad, he must declare, I personally witnessed the writing and the signing. Okay, now it just so happens that these three topics, the writing, the signing, and the shaliach, are the three main topics that the next 8 chapters of Gittin will be devoted to discussing. The next 9 chapters, actually, will be devoted to discussing. Most of Tractate Gittin is devoted to those 3 topics. And the first Mishnah, instead of presenting each of these topics in order, gives us an out-of-the-way law, okay, that relies on these 3 topics being known already. Okay, so it's really starting from the end. Now, why am I particularly fond of Masechet Gittin? Because the last Mishnah, Masechet Gittin, closes like this. Beit Shammai says, a person shall not divorce his wife unless he found in her that she was unfaithful to him, dvar erva, okay, that she had committed adultery. Beit Hillel says no. He doesn't read it as dvar erva, but rather as ervat davar, which is the language of the pasuk. She takes literally as meaning something wrong. He has to find some flaw. So it could even be that she burned his soup. Okay, if she burned his soup, that could be a reason for divorcing. And that let's not get this wrong. Beit Hillel is not saying every time your wife burns your soup, you should divorce her. What he's saying is, if the reason you want to divorce her is because she burnt your soup, that's legitimate. But if you have no flaw that you can find in her, but only, let's see the contra here, Rabbi Akiva says, even if he finds someone else whom he likes better. Okay, in other words, you ditch your wife. Again, Rabbi Akiva is not recommending that. Let's remember, Rabbi Akiva was one of the great romantics in Jewish history. Okay, even though he had an unusual way of showing it by staying away for 24 years. But the Talmud presents that as a tremendous romance. He and his wife were of one mind. They both single-mindedly wanted Rabbi Akiva to study for 24 years. And that was their great and deep romance. And that's how the Talmud presents it. Rabbi Akiva is an incurable romantic. And maybe that's exactly why he says, if you reach the point where there's some other woman whom you love more than your wife, don't stay married. That's simply wrong. Okay? That is grounds for divorce. Beit Hillel says no. Just because you found someone else better is not a reason to ditch your wife. You have a commitment. You committed to her. So if you found something wrong with her, it doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world you found wrong with her, but something. And Beit Shammai says no. Short of her being unfaithful to you, you have no grounds for divorce. Now, we're not going to get into all the ins and outs of how each one of these sages views the institution of marriage or the institution of divorce. But one thing we'll note, where should this Mishnah have logically appeared?
Like before anything else.
That's right. I would have put this at the beginning of the Masechet. So let's look at what this Masechet has done. The first Mishnah is something that just should have appeared at the end because it's presupposing most of the information that's going to be presented later on in the Masechet. So the first Mishnah is really the Mishnah should have been towards the end of the Masechet. The last Mishnah is the Mishnah that logically we would think should be at the beginning of the Masechet. It's all backwards, all upside down. Okay? Okay, Masechet Shabbat, our third example. The Mishnah opens with, okay, moving an object, okay? Yitziot Shabbat is referring to transporting an object from a public domain to a private domain, or from a private domain to a public domain, is two which are four. In other words, there are two different large categories of transporting an object on Shabbat, and it divides up into four subheadings. Okay? So you have two which are for bifnim, bifnim meaning the person who's inside, and shtaim she'en arba bachutz. Okay? And two which are for outside. Ketzad, so the Mishnah now elaborates. Okay? And in a very graphic way. Okay? It's describing an act of tzedakah, which during the week, of course, is a wonderful thing to do. And the poor person will be standing outside in the Rishut Harabim, and the Baal Habayit will be standing inside, okay, in his home, okay? And then the transfer can take place in various ways, because the ani is carrying around a basket, because he's gathering food. Okay, it's not money, he's gathering food. So he's got a basket with him, and he will sometimes pass the basket inside to the Baal Habayit, and the Baal Habayit will put the food into it. So in that case, he has transferred the basket from outside to inside. Okay, so that's one form of transporting. Okay, or sometimes he'll just hold the basket, and the Baal Habayit will deposit the food inside the basket. So then the Baal Habayit has transported it. But it could also be an intermediate case where he sticks his basket inside, the Baal Habayit picks up the food, puts it down in the basket, and then the ani takes it outside. So that's another kind. Each one of them has its own rules and regulations. That's the first Mishnah. Does this belong at the very beginning of the tractate? Now, once again, we would say, well, don't we want to know what melachot are forbidden on Shabbat? Don't we want to know the basic definitions of what transporting is all about? All of these things will be dealt with later. So, for example, what things are prohibited on Shabbat? Where does that come up? Look at the 7th chapter of Masechet Shabbat. By the way, I don't think that's accidental, that the 7th chapter has what's probably the most central Mishnah in the entire tractate. Avot melachot. What are the forbidden kinds of work on Shabbat? There are 40 minus 1, namely 39, forbidden categories of work on Shabbat, including sowing and plowing and reaping and so on. Okay? That's the Mishnah we would have probably imagined would appear at the beginning of the tractate. And here it occurs only in chapter 7. And not even at the beginning of chapter 7, by the way, the second Mishnah in chapter 7. Okay, and the Mishnah that appears at the beginning is, again, a rather esoteric, particular case that is presupposing a lot of the information that will be presented later on in the tractate. Okay, so here we've seen just a few brief examples of why Mishnah is a challenging text. So let's start off by getting a sense of what is Mishnah and how and when was it compiled? Okay, so here's where we're going to go into a little bit of history. Start off with the Rambam. Okay, the Rambam describes Mishnah as follows. Okay, again, I'll just translate. You can follow along in the Hebrew. Your Hebrew is up to it. And he, namely Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, gathered together all of the different traditions and all of the laws and all of the explanations and interpretations that had been heard and transmitted from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, as well as those that had been taught by the high courts of every generation. And from all of these traditions, he compiled a book called Mishnah. So what we learn from here is, at least the way the Rambam presents it, and we'll see as we go along that this is absolutely correct. It can easily be demonstrated. Mishnah is not a work that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi sat down and compiled from scratch. Okay. Now, you may note, by the way, I'm going to, by and large, avoid ever saying that Rabbi wrote the Mishnah. Okay, because Mishnah is oral law. The Mishnah was almost definitely not written. By now it's written. We read it from a written text. But the Mishnah initially was compiled, it was redacted, it was not written. Okay, and we'll get to some of the background to that as we go along. Okay, okay. Now, here just one proof. There are many proofs from the Mishnah that the Rambam is correct, and Rabbi did not compose the Mishnah, but compiled and redacted the Mishnah. Okay, so one of the many proofs. Okay, I brought from a passage in the Gemara, Masechet Eruvin, where in our printed versions it says Rabbi Abba said the following, but the more accurate versions of the Gemara read Amar Rabbi. And by the way, this more accurate version is quoted, among other places, by Igeret of Shiragon, which we'll have a few words to say about in a few minutes. Okay, so Rabbi said, if someone can ask the people who live in Judea, okay, who are very meticulous in their language, does it say me'abrin in the Mishnah? He's asking about the text of the Mishnah. Does the Mishnah read me'abrin with an aleph or me'abrin with an ayin? The two words are pronounced in a similar way. You see from here, by the way, that probably at the time of Rabbi, people weren't that careful about differentiating aleph from ayin. Okay? Okay, but he said in Yehuda, they are more careful. So ask them, okay, was the Mishnah taught with me'abrin with an aleph or me'abrin with an ayin? It doesn't matter why that makes a difference in terms of the Mishnah and Eruvin. What matters is the one who's asking this question is the one who we consider to be the author of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Well, if he composed the Mishnah, why is he asking what the proper text is? The answer is he didn't compose the Mishnah. He compiled the Mishnah. He took traditions that were in his possession and he redacted them and wove them together to produce the text that we call Mishnah. Okay, so it's very clear that the Mishnah is not a composed text by Rabbi, but a compiled and redacted text. Okay, now the next thing I want to discuss is, okay, again, a very big topic that we can only present very briefly, and that is, what do we mean when we say oral law? Why did Mishnah have to wait to be compiled by Rabbi in about the year 200 CE, at the end of the Tannaitic period? Okay, 2 generations after Rabbi Akiva and the Bar Kokhba rebellion, about 5 generations after the destruction of the Second Temple. That period between the destruction of the Second Temple and the compilation of the Mishnah, what we call the Tannaitic period. Okay, it's roughly between 70 CE and 200 CE. Okay, now why did it take that long for the Mishnah to be compiled? So the answer is because what Mishnah really is a compilation of oral law. So the first thing you have to do is define our term. What is Torah Sheba'al Peh? Okay, and there's a very important source about the history and background to the compilation of the major works of Torah Shebaal Peh, namely the Mishnah, the Tosefta, and the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, this very important source is from the end of the Gaonic period. Okay, a Gaon in Pumbedita named Rav Shrira Gaon. Okay, it was towards the end. There was one generation after him. He had a long tenure as the head of the Pumbedita Yeshiva. He was followed by his son Rav Hai Gaon, okay, who also had a very long tenure. Okay, so Rav Shrira Gaon lived in the 10th century CE. Okay, and Rav Hai Gaon takes you from the end of the 10th century CE into the 11th century CE. Okay, Rav Shrira Gaon, we'll see the questions in a bit. He was asked questions about the how and when the Mishnah came to be compiled. So he went into a very lengthy discourse. Rav Shrira Gaon is a very lengthy letter, okay, detailing it, and there's a lot of important information there. You know, some of it very reliable and some of it more speculative, okay? But one of the interesting things in Rav Shrira Gaon is that he starts off by explaining what do we mean by Torah Shebaal Peh, by oral law. So we would think oral law is something that's not written. Rav Shrira Gaon gives a somewhat different definition. Okay, I'll again translate the text for you. There was no one of the early authorities who wrote anything until the end of the days of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. And people, in fact, did not, okay, I'm at the end of the first line, V'chein nami lo havu. And people did also not. Garsi kulhu b'feh echad, okay, Garse is to recite orally, b'feh echad v'lashon echad, in one formulation, and they did not have things that were established, metukanim, or Mishnah Yudua, or a known Mishnah. What he means by Mishnah, we'll see in a bit. Rather, not rather, but meaning that all will teach it in one language. Rather, Otana Tamim Mashmuot, I'm in the third line, Otana Tamim Mashmuot, the contents were all equal, but everyone would teach his student in any order that he wanted and in any manner that he wanted. That's what oral law really means. Oral law means the content is passed on, but there is no fixed text. Now, a fixed text has two elements to it. A fixed text means a fixed formulation and a fixed order. That's what Mishnah means. And that's what originally didn't exist. In other words, the idea was everyone receives the content in the way that works for him and the way that works for his teacher. Each teacher wants to transmit it in the way that works best for him, okay, and to transmit it, okay, in the language that works for him and in the order that works for him. And then the student will take the same contents and pass them on again in the way that works for him. So no two teachers will be transmitting it in exactly the same way, but it will be the same contents. Mishnah means taking what, now that's very important, A, for accuracy, because once you have a fixed text, what will invariably happen is the fixed text will be open to interpretation. And you'll have differences of opinion as how to interpret the text. So if you want to preserve the content, paradoxically enough, the better way to preserve the content is to be free and open in terms of the language and the order. Let each teacher teach it in the way that works best for him. And let each student receive it and transmit it in the way that works best for him. And that way you can preserve the contents, but you don't have any fixed text. And at some point, it was decided that the oral law had to become a fixed text, which means it had to be given precise formulation, okay? And the formulation will be passed on. In a sense, the formulation more than the content will be passed on. So sometimes people will get the formulation and they won't remember what content was supposed to underlie it. And you can have differences of opinion what content is indicated by that formulation. And similarly, a fixed order. Okay, so that's what actually happened. Okay, now we'll skip over Rav Sadia Gaon and sort of see him retrospectively through the questions asked to Rav Shira Gaon. Rav Sadia Gaon lived about 100 years before Rav Shira Gaon, and he began to confront the polemic of the Karaites against the Talmud. Karaites thought that the Talmud was a forgery. Okay, that it's not the real thing. Torah is open to our interpretation. We should interpret it. Okay, we shouldn't accept the received traditions transmitted to us by the Talmud, and they had many, many ways of trying to demonstrate that the Talmud is not an authoritative work. So Rav Sadia Gaon took upon himself the task of rebutting their arguments and trying to show the Talmud is an authoritative work. And in doing that, sometimes he sort of got carried away. Okay, and he made claims that were very hard to support. So for example, one of the claims that he made to try to support the authority of the Talmud was that the Mishnah, most of the Mishnah was formulated and arranged at the time of Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, at the beginning of the Second Temple period. Okay, so you're talking about something that's between 400 to 500 years earlier than when we know that the Mishnah was finally compiled. Okay, that was Rav Sadia Gaon's claim. And about 100 years later, a group of sages in an island called Kairouan, okay, off of the coast of Tunisia, okay, there were some very important leading sages who lived there on this island of Kairouan. Okay, they sent the questions to Rav Shira Gaon and said, please explain to us how the Mishnah was compiled, because there are a lot of things that don't make sense to us. And you can see from their questions that they had realized that Rav Sadia Gaon's way of reconstructing the compilation of the Mishnah didn't pass muster, didn't stand up to criticism. Okay, and so they asked, for example, okay, here we have Rav Shira Gaon, the questions. You asked, how was the Mishnah written? If Anshe Knesset Hagdolah started to write it, that was Rav Sadia Gaon's claim. And then the little by little sages of future generations added to it until Rabbi came and he concluded it. Well, why is it that most of the sages who are mentioned in the Mishnah have names like Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, who are all disciples of Rabbi Akiva? They caught Rav Sadia Gaon. Okay, there's no way of defending Rav Sadia Gaon against this challenge, and Rav Shira Gaon doesn't even bother to try. Okay, Rav Shira Gaon acknowledges that the main compilation of the Mishnah started only a few generations before it was actually concluded. And that's why the main sages who are authors of the Mishnah are the disciples of Rabbi Akiva, who are exactly one generation before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Okay, now there's also proof that it didn't actually start quite that late. Okay, the Tosefta and Eduyot tells us that the tractate Eduyot, okay, is rooted in after the destruction of the temple. The sages in Yavne got together and said, we're afraid the Torah will be forgotten. So let's start putting it in order. Let's start compiling it. Let's start off with the disputes between Hillel and Shammai. And that's how Tractate Eduyot actually opens, with the disputes between Hillel and Shammai. So here you see that already immediately after the destruction of the temple, you already have the sages of Yavne, who are working on compiling the Mishnah, and it probably started already a generation or two earlier, before the destruction of the temple. Again, we can't go through all of the proofs and arguments for that, but just one interesting proof text for that, the Mishnah Psachim that you have here on your screen, okay, which tells us about the mitzvah of Bdikat Chametz, okay, the night before Pesach, the night of Erev Pesach. And the Mishnah says, and why did they say two rows in a wine cellar? Okay, so someone prior to the Mishnah has enunciated a rule that when you're checking a wine cellar for chametz, it's enough to check 2 rows. And now the Mishnah records a dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai says 2 rows, okay, in the entire surface of the wine cellar, which could either mean the entire top row and the entire front row, or it could mean the 2 front rows. But it's full rows that have to be inspected for chametz. And Beit Hillel says, no, only the 2 top, okay, the 2 top rows, the 2 rows at the top, not along the entire cellar, just the 2 that are both at the top and on the outside. So it's either the top one and the one behind it, or the top one and the one below it. Those are 2 interpretations. What's interesting for us is Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai already have a tradition that's formulated in the words Shtei Shurot b'Martev. They know this formulation and they don't know what it means. Right? This is exactly what happens when you take a tradition and freeze it in a fixed formulation. So Beit Hillel thinks it means one thing, and Beit Shammai thinks that formulation means a different thing, which means that prior to Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai were before the destruction of the temple. The destruction leading up to and including the destruction of the temple is Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and they're already inheriting received traditions, okay, that have been formulated in the form of Mishnah. Okay, now there are a lot of proofs, so we don't have time to go through all of these, okay, all of these texts. Okay, let's just look at maybe one more text from Mishnah in Psachim, which will begin to give us an insight as to how the Mishnah works with these texts that apparently started to be redacted already towards the end of the Second Temple period, moved into higher gear after the destruction of the temple, and moved into highest gear at the time of Rabbi Akiva. Those are the sources we've just skipped over, is to show that Rabbi Akiva played a major role in redacting the Mishnah. But let's just look at a source that gives us a bit of insight into how Rabbi works when he redacts the Mishnah. So we'll start with the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah in Psachim, top of your screen. Rabban Gamliel says that 3 women can prepare their matzot together. They can knead their matzot together and bake them in one oven. How so? Okay, and one after the other. They'll bake them one after the other. The Chachamim say no. Okay, if 3 women want to work together, they have to stagger the work. Let one woman, okay, knead while the second one is rolling it out, and the third one is already baking it. Okay, so they're all at a different stage, and then they can stagger it. So that way, each one will finish the matzah within the appropriate time frame. But Rabban Gamliel thinks even if they're all kneading it at the same time, so one will continue kneading it while the other one is baking, and then the second one will bake while the third one is still kneading, and that can work out. Okay? Rabbi Akiva says, well, it all depends. Not all women are the same, and not all wood supply is the same, and not all ovens are the same. In other words, it all depends. Okay, if you've got women who can work fast, and if you have trees that are burned very well, and if you have a very high quality oven, so then you can manage to do it the way Rabban Gamliel says. But if not, so then you've got to stagger it the way the Chachamim say. Okay? Now, why does this interest us? Because there's a Baraita. A Baraita is a Mishnaic formulation that didn't make it into the cut. Okay? When Rabbi decided what to include in his Mishnah, he left out a lot of materials. In fact, he left out a lot more materials than he put in. Okay? All those materials we call baraitot, from the word bar, which means outside, external. These are external Mishnayot. Okay? So they weren't included in the canonical Mishnah. So one of the sources for baraitot is the Talmud. The Talmud often cites baraita. So Tanya, that indicates a baraita. Rabbi Akiva said, I spoke before Rabban Gamliel. I said to him, my master, please teach us if the women are, when you say the women can all, knead together and then bake it one after the other, which women are you talking about, please? Are you talking about women who are very quick, okay, who can work quickly? Or are you talking even about women who aren't so quick? Are you talking about wet logs? Or are you talking, moist logs? Or are you talking about dry logs? Are you talking about a very superheated oven or an oven that is cooler? What are you talking about? Says Rabbi Akiva to Rabban Gamliel. So he said, okay, so he gave him an answer. Okay, whatever answer he gave them doesn't interest us yet. But now let's go back to the Mishnah and let's see what is the relationship between the Baraita and the Mishnah. It's clear that the Baraita preserves the source from which the Mishnah was composed. The Mishnah is a variation on the Baraita. The Baraita is clearly an earlier source, because in the Baraita you have Rabbi Akiva saying exactly how he came to his conclusion. Okay, there was a discussion. Rabban Gamliel said something. Rabbi Akiva came to him and said, please explain the following to me. Now what happens when we get to the Mishnah? The Mishnah leaves out the discussion. Instead, what does the Mishnah do? The Mishnah presents Rabbi Akiva as a third opinion. Presents Rabban Gamliel as opinion number one. It has an opposing opinion. It says absolutely not. You can never do what Rabban Gamliel says. And Rabbi Akiva, who in the Baraita is debating this with Rabbi, and not even debating, he's presenting it as a question, a challenging question, but a question nonetheless. In the Mishnah, it's now being presented as an opinion. So here you get a sense of how Rabbi is taking earlier sources and reworking them, refashioning them. Okay? So now, these are two important principles, and this is, I think, the basic methodological principle that we're going to need in order to start engaging in our study. Okay? The first thing that we see is that the Mishnah is, in fact, taking earlier sources, relying on earlier sources. The Mishnah is not compiled yesh me'ayin, it's not ab initio, it's taking earlier sources. The second thing is the Mishnah redactor very often sees fit to revise his earlier sources. This, by the way, is a very important principle in contemporary scholarship. What many contemporary scholars try to do, this is called the philological approach, is to explain away anomalies in Mishnah. You go back to what we saw in Tractate Brachot or Tractate Gitin, okay, how it's compiled in a puzzling and challenging way. So what they'll say is, well, Rabbi's hands were tied. This is oral law. Remember, it's not being written, it's oral. People are memorizing it. And once something's been memorized a certain way, you don't want to start confusing them by pulling out the carpet from under them and changing the rules of the game. You're changing the language, you're changing the order, it's going to confuse people. Therefore, Rabbi's hands were tied. He had to preserve his sources as they were, and that creates all kinds of anomalies. But what we see here in this example that I brought is that that's not the case. Rabbi feels free to modify the sources, reformulate them as he sees fit. He's not beholden to his sources to that degree. So since Rabbi is willing to revise his sources, okay, so that makes the questions we raised at the beginning of the class all the more pressing. Okay, but I'd like to do at the end, just telegraphically, is come back to the questions we raised at the beginning about brachot and start to see how we can begin approaching them. And this is the approach we're going to be giving. Rabbanit Adina and I will be presenting in this course, that the key to understanding how Mishnah is compiled is close reading technique. If you pay close attention to the language of the Mishnah and the structures of the Mishnah in terms of how words and themes are repeated, okay, and what kinds of patterns are they repeated, that's going to be the key to understanding what Rabbi was about in compiling the Mishnah. Okay, so we'll just come back to that first Mishnah. From when do you read the Mishnah in the evenings? From the time that the Kohanim go in to eat their truma. And then we have another image here until the end of the first watch. It seems pretty clear that the first watch would not be the first watch in a Roman military camp, or probably not even in the Bar Kokhba military camp, okay, but in the temple, because Kohanim and Leviim used to guard in the temple every night, and they had watches. Okay, and 3 times during the night they would have 3 mishmarot every night. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. And then the Mishnah continues with a story about Rabban Gamliel's sons, who came home late from a wedding party, and they said, "Oh, we missed midnight. Can we still read Shema?" And Rabban Gamliel said, "Well, if dawn hasn't broken yet, you can, because whenever the sages said that something has to be done until midnight, what they really mean is the mitzvah is to do it all night, but they were afraid that if you give people too much time and don't set a deadline, so people will procrastinate and then end up not doing it. So it's better to set a deadline, and that way you're sure people will get it in before the deadline." Now, what's interesting here is the examples he quotes. It says, where else do we see this? Well, let's take a look. We're the last 3 lines of the Mishnah. Okay, so you have, for example, okay, towards the end of the 3rd line before the end, hekter chalavim ve'varim. Okay, that's the burning of fats on the altar that took place throughout the night, but the mitzvah is to do it all night. The Chachamim said, make sure to do it by midnight, and any sacrifices that need to be eaten for 1 whole day, the mitzvah is you start it during the day, you continue it that night, you can really conclude it by the morning, but the Chachamim said make sure to finish it by midnight. Where are these examples all taken from? The temple. And Rabbi Eliezer's presentation of till when can you recite Shema, the end of the first watch, it's taken from the temple. From when can we read Shema? from when the Kohanim can eat their truma. That's not exactly temple service, but it's closely aligned with it. You see, the whole Mishnah seems to be giving us a hidden message. The hidden message is there is some kind of connection between the reading of Shema and the temple service. Now, if we note that the sages quoted in this Mishnah are all sages who lived at the time of Yavne, right after the destruction of the temple, I think we're getting a hint as to what the hidden message of our Mishnah is. The hidden message of our Mishnah is, as long as the temple stood, okay, so then the time frame that mattered to us was the temple time frame. Now that the temple is no longer standing, we now have a new service that's going to replace the temple service in our religious observance, namely the reading of the Shema. So the hidden message of the first Mishnah is that the reading of the Shema, okay, is not just a mitzvah that you have to do daily, but it's a mitzvah that plays, after the destruction of the temple, it plays a major role in the life of a Jew. In the temple service was front and center in the life of a Jew. After the destruction of the temple, you don't have that any longer. You need to find a replacement. One of the replacements is the reading of Shema, which is also a time-bound mitzvah, like so many of the observances in the temple. So that's like our first cue as to what kind of thing is Rabbi doing when he formulates things in a certain way, when he arranges things in a certain way. The rest of the course is going to be devoted to the kinds of close reading techniques that we can use in Mishnah in order to ferret out these hidden messages. Thank you all for joining, and I hope and expect to see you all next week.
Okay, thank you. Let me just spotlight myself so you can all see me. Thank you so much. Rabbi Walfish, do you want to unshare the screen just so everybody can see us
sure.
fully? If not, no worries.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
So thank you so much, Rabbi Walfish, and thank you everyone who joined us today. Always great learning together. Just a few announcements before we say goodbye. Folzman is just getting kicked off, so there's still plenty of time to sign up for some of we have over 24 classes that we'll be running. So yeah, keep checking our website and signing up for classes. We have more than 150 hours of Torah. Tonight at 7 p.m. our Talmud shiur for middle school girls starts up again for the season. We still have 2 sections of Talmud for adults, also starting in early November. Amy Gottlieb's writing workshop, which integrates study of Jewish text, prose writing, and exploration of themes in narrative time, begins on Thursday. You can always email Noah at batmiri@risha.org. For information about financial aid for any of our Talmud shiurim or workshops. You can learn more about all these offerings and also try our new easy registration form at 5783.risha.org. So again, thanks for joining us today, and thank you, Rabbi Walfish, for teaching this wonderful series. And I can't wait to see you next time. Lehitraot.
Lehitraot. Thank you so much. It was just wonderful. Can I just ask Rabbi Walfish and Evie, so sorry, or Noah, is there a way to prepare in advance to know what we'll study? Don't worry if not, it's all fabulous. Next week, and we can brush up on our, is there a way to know what we'll study next week, a text we should explore?
Yes, I will send out source sheets for next week, and I'll also ask Adina to do likewise every week when she's teaching.
Okay, don't make it a burden. It's not necessary. It's just if it was on your agenda. So.
Yeah, it's not a problem.
Okay,
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, once if Kayla has a link for the source sheet, you'll be sure
She'll
to
post
send it before class.
yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Oh, wait, I think Nathan had his hand up.
Oh,
Oh,
I just,
Nathan, sorry, Nathan.
we can end it if you
didn't
want.
see it.
I
Go
just have
ahead.
a clarifying question for Rabbi Walfish, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So regarding the example of the Breita and the Mishnah and Psachim, is the idea that Rebbe revised, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, as it were, more so perhaps like interpreted his reasoning to then say like this is what Rabbi Akiva holds? Like, is there not an implicit interpretation of Rabbi Akiva there?
In this case, yes. I think in some cases, it's just a different way of presenting it. In other words, Rabbi will usually avoid the dialogue form. Okay, not always. There are a significant number of dialogues of this nature in the Mishnah, but by and large, I think Rabbi prefers to present things in a succinct, concise, direct way. This opinion, this opinion, this opinion. Or he'd rather have that than have like the whole interchange. Oh, well, what do you say about this? I think that, and I think, that. So very often it's just a revision in terms of how to present it, which sometimes is just, for rhetorical or educational purposes, sometimes maybe for additional purposes as well. In this particular case, it's not clear from the original source that it's not clear from the original source that in fact Rabbi Akiva disagrees. He just asks him a question, he challenges him, maybe he doesn't even disagree. So in this case, to present him as a different opinion, I think is adding something to the source and not just, a difference of presentation. In each case, I think you have to inspect it on its, on its own merits and see how exactly he's revising the source.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Sorry. Any other questions today? I'm sorry that I didn't originally give time for questions. Any additional questions today? I don't see anything on Facebook. Okay, so we will see each other next week. Lehitraot, everyone.